It's the Brad and John Show.
It's the Brad and John Show. Today's date is February 28th, the last day of February. This is the C block, which means we start this at right around 7:40 or so. Okay, John, everybody is playing this, so I've got it, okay? And we talked about this yesterday. This is the Jake Tapper thing. Have you heard this before?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is the Jake Tapper thing. I don't know when this was, but he was interviewing Lara. Is that how you pronounce her name, Lara? It's not Lara, it's Lara. Is it Lara? Lara Trump?
I think it's Lara, yeah.
Lara Trump. Okay. He's having an interview with her, and he goes sort of off the rails. I'll go ahead and play this. Okay, here we go.
Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You have no.
I can't.
That's so amazing. It's so amazing to me that
try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was.
I think that you were mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses diagnosing politicians from afar. Plenty of people have diagnosed your father from afar, and I'm sure it offends you. Your father.
Okay, that's Jake Tapper going after Lara Trump when she made the comment. This was back before her father, it's not her father, but her father-in-law won the election, and essentially saying that Joe Biden is say it again, I can never say that.
It's cognitively, yep.
Cognitively impaired, okay? And then it comes out this week that Jake Tapper is writing a book about how the press suppressed all this information about how bad a shape Joe Biden was in. Is this like the ultimate in hypocrisy? I mean, how does this guy sleep at night? You know what I'm saying?
I think maybe he's just come around. Maybe he's found some new evidence. Maybe he temporarily didn't see what was going on, and then after the election, he realized that he was wrong. You know, people can change their mind.
Well, John, you're going to be mad at me, but I got into I don't want to say a battle, a small little skirmish between myself and Jane Duker. And we talked about this on the show earlier this week when she posted that what they're changing the rules of the White House press corps, and they're getting rid of the White House Press Association, which is an organization which essentially has run the White House press corps, and the president and his staff are taking this over, and they're going to allow people in, never been in before, blah, 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 blah. And Jane Duker lost her head over this because, in fact, this is a First Amendment violation. Okay, so I said something to her, and she said something back to me. Well, if you're not allowing the people to have access to the White House, and my point is this: a good journalist does not report what the government feeds them. The White House press, whoever it is, KJP, the current lady, Carolyn Levitt, they're feeding the bias information from the White House, just like every corporate comms guy and gal is feeding the corporate line to the press, correct?
Yeah, you're right about that.
And so, in other words, the idea being a good journalist is not going to say, let's say back in the day, if you gave out a press release that was talking about something, and you saw that press release printed word for word as someone's story, wouldn't you go, oh my God, this person's a lightweight, right? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, and absolutely. And we see that all the time, don't we, Brad?
Right. And to the point, the idea being is that if you're limiting the people, and the interesting part of this is this whole thing is about old school versus new school. The old school being CBS, NBC, Associated Press, which has this battle going on with Trump right now about the whole crazy thing with, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it. And part of it is the fact that what you start to see happening is MSNBC starting to fall apart. Starting to fall apart. It has fallen apart because people don't believe them anymore. And this is the problem. Do people believe Joe Rogan? I think people do. People look at Joe Rogan and go like, okay, this guy's a straight shooter. He's going to tell me both sides of the story. Yeah, he's got a dog in the fight. He's a big he's a big UFC guy, and he's going to beat that drum about how great the UFC is, and he's never going to tell you about how these guys have CTE and brain damage and stuff like that. But yet, by the same token, a lot of stuff he says is upfront and and to the point. And this whole crazy thing with the fact that limiting the people of the White House, those people are elites right now. If you and I I have 2 stupid journalism degrees. I own these stupid radio stations. If I were to contact the White House press corps or whoever it is and say, I'd like to get credentialed into the White House, do you know what my chances of that are, John?
Very little.
Yes, my chances are I would probably be better off going down to the Quickie Mart, buying a pull tab or buying, a Mega Millions or a Powerball ticket and go, well, okay, buddy, let's see what happens. You know what I mean? And that's the way it works. It's elite, 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 elite. And little bit different with the State House because of the fact that, quite honestly, it's gone the other way, where what you have is you have fewer and fewer and fewer reporters covering Jefferson City. And I would imagine that's probably the same in Springfield, Illinois, and most of the way around the country because the local media people have been decimated by, and like I said, I need to get a copy of this promo I keep hearing on NPR. I've told you about it before, where the woman comes on, she says, in this very serious voice, every month there are 2 local newspapers that go out of business. But you have NPR. We come in to fill the void. Okay, so let's say there's a local newspaper in Pike County, Missouri, which is a couple counties north of St. Charles. And let's say that newspaper goes out of business. How in the hell is NPR filling the void for those people that live in Louisiana, Missouri, and things like that? You know what I'm saying, John?
I do know. Well, folks up there can just listen to a story about the Gateway Arch and the terrorizing cuts. That's all they need. You don't need to know what's going on in Bowling Green in your own community. Just trust NPR to tell you the national news.
But see, once again, the problem there, I said it again, I'm sorry, once again, the problem there is, do you trust NPR, John? Do you trust?
Absolutely not. And I think we see that most people don't.
Right. And yet they're living this bubble that they think, oh my God, people live and die what we say. We have to talk like this. We can't elevate our voices. We can't ever sound excited. We have a moderated tone to our voices, right, John? We have to talk like this. And at the end of the interview, you have to, I'm interviewing John at the interview, and I say, John Combest, thanks so much for being with us today on NPR. And what do you say, John?
I respond in kind with a very soft voice. There's a terrific story that I have at the actual top headline today, which is from National NPR. And the headline is, Josh Hawley says Doge needs to comply with the law. And this is from some gal at National NPR. But they have a sentence in here in the setup where they talk about how conservatives have complained about big tech companies. And the line from NPR is, there's no clear evidence of an anti-conservative bias. And both the left and right have alleged suppression of speech online. So this is NPR telling us that there's no clear evidence of social media companies like Facebook/Meta suppressing conservative voices or having a liberal bias. Now, if you believe that, you're probably an NPR listener.
Well, it's just like the head of NPR News when the Hunter Biden laptop thing was hot and heavy. Remember that famous quote?
Yeah, I do.
He essentially said, I can't remember exactly what he said. Someone questioned, why aren't you covering the Hunter Biden laptop issue? And he goes, no story there. I'm going like, no.
Yeah, and we learned, didn't we?
Right, no story there. See, this is the problem, and this is sort of dovetails when I'm talking about the Washington press corps. Okay. You go to, let's probably say, the most famous journalistic situation with the Watergate situation with the 2 reporters, the 2 Woodward and Bernstein, the 2 Washington Post reporters. Essentially, did they get their information from going to White House press conferences? No. They got their information from doing old-fashioned journalism where they developed sources. They got confidential sources. They got people to give them documents. Go back to the Dr. What's the guy with the Pentagon Papers? Ellsworth, is that his name? Remember who you were talking about?
Yeah, Ellsworth, yeah.
Okay, what did he do? He developed confidential sources. He dug, and he didn't go to someone, hey, I'm talking to the official press corps from the official press secretary of the president of the United States. We understand there's some controversy about this. What's going on at the Pentagon? Oh, nothing there. There's no problem whatsoever. Don't believe what people are telling you. There's no problem at all at the Pentagon. Okay, thank you very much. We won't do this story. You don't know. That's the whole problem. This is what was instilled in me by Dr. Camille Winter.
I was just gonna say, Brad, is there any professor you haven't talked about since Monday that might have an opinion on this?
Who literally was run out of Czechoslovakia by the Russians as they came.
And what happened to his papers, Brad?
What is his
academic record? What happened to those?
They threw it away. They expunged.
Yeah, that's right.
They expunged that he went to school and got a PhD, and when he came here to the United States, he could not officially be determined as a PhD. We were told by our other see, here we go again. Our other professors saying, do not address Dr. Winter as Dr. Winter. We can't verify that he actually has a PhD because his documents were shredded by the Russians that invented Czechoslovakia. I'm thinking to myself, that's even more reason why I'm going to call this guy doctor, because of the fact that, he deserves it more than these other brainiacs who think, oh, I've got a PhD, so I'm an important person. You know what I'm saying?
I do know. I know exactly what you mean.
See, it all comes down to kabuki. It's all kabuki, John. It's all kabuki. It's just everybody's just playing a game. Everybody's on stage. They're just doing their little thing. And, oh, look at this. And I'm the guy that sits here. And says, these politicians are taking their positions too serious on Twitter. I need to throw in the BJ show just to shake things up a little bit. Don't you think, John?
Yeah, and then John goes and hits the button that says mark as spam. And then I say, was this directed at you? And I say, no. Why is this spam? Because it has nothing to do with what this poor elected official was tweeting about.
John is.
And then when we go to Brad's Twitter accounts, they say, sorry, are you sure you want to see this account? It's been flagged for a high level of spam. And I say, really?
John.
Wow, how did that happen?
John has become the Twitter police. Okay, so what are we going to talk about now? Okay, I've got all these things to talk about. Matter of fact, we talked about this the other day, and this Wisconsin governor. Have you heard this bizarre story of the Wisconsin governor that came out with? Remember, I said it on the air the other morning, and you didn't believe me when I said they were changing.
We did a whole B block about it this week. You're right, Brad, about insemination.
Did you hear the update on this?
No, what is that?
Okay, for those of you who don't know the story, some kind of a bill came out from the governor of Wisconsin, and they took out all the phrases like mother and father, and like for mother was it inseminated person? Wasn't that what it was?
Yeah, inseminated person. Yeah.
Inseminated person was a mother. Okay, he was asked about this at a press conference, and he didn't know what they were talking about. Because why, John? Why didn't he know what they were talking about?
Because probably somebody on his staff was responsible for the decision, and nobody smartened him up to what was going on.
Yes, they put all this stuff.
Is that what happened? I don't know.
That's exactly what happened. He supposedly authored this bill or something like that, and when he was quizzed about these crazy, what do you call it, politically correct terms, they came up with a bunch of new ones. That father was taken out, and that was non-inseminating person, or the inseminator, or whatever it was. It was like the Terminator, the inseminator. That kind of stuff. The inseminator, and he didn't know anything about it. So it's to the point where it's just like, okay. And this is the point that Donald Trump keeps making. It's the swamp. The swamp, and not necessarily in D.C. What's the capital of Wisconsin? Is it Madison?
Madison.
Okay,
yeah.
So the swamp is running the state of Wisconsin. Now, do you think the swamp rumps Missouri? Do you think Kehoe has got his finger on the pulse? Or do you think there's people pulling these kind of numbers behind his back as well, too?
Oh, I would imagine that Kehoe is pretty, just based on his extensive time in state government, I don't think there's a lot that goes on that he's not aware of.
So you think that if somebody issues a press release that he's personally signed off on that it involves him? Today, Governor Kehoe said blah 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 blah. You think he? I think it's been on his desk or on his phone, and I think he skimmed it. Probably, yeah. Okay. So did you, in your times as a comms guy, did you ever let out a press release that one of the guys that was quoted in there saying, "John, I never said that"? Did it ever happen to you?
Not in a bad way, but in a good way all the time. Yeah, we had a number of non-English speakers, or I should say folks who spoke English, but English wasn't their second language. So we would do quote-unquote interviews with major publications, and I would just send them quotes because these executives trusted me. And then it would come out and they would be like, wow, that was great. Like, you made me sound really good. And they had no idea what I had usually sent it to them for approval for them to sign off. But if you have the trust of an executive, they'll just, so there's some great interviews that remain out there with executives that are Q&As from major publications. I don't want to resume flex here, but with major publications quoting our executives, and I wrote all the answers. And the executives, if you asked them today what they said about issue X, they would have no idea what I wrote. But it was really good. I mean, not to brag, but, you know. So if you meet an executive, and it happens all the time, folks will come up at events and tell an executive from company X, gosh, I loved your LinkedIn post. I had no idea that your company was doing so much in, you know, Argentina about climate change. And the executive will be like, yeah, you know, it's so important. We got to work with those folks down there. The executive will have no idea, doesn't use LinkedIn, has never even read the post, but his comms team put it together and did a good job, you know? And it has, what the funniest thing, Brad, real quick, is that on LinkedIn, a lot of times you'll see people that give a big thumbs up, like, I want this executive to see that I love what they wrote. An executive is not on LinkedIn. An executive has no idea that you're, as kids would say, glazing them or applauding. You're doing the applaud sign on their LinkedIn posts. Executives don't know. Like, they're doing important business stuff. They're not, you know, they don't spend their Sundays going down to pick and pull, you know?
Say it with me, listeners. Kabuki, kabuki, kabuki. It's all kabuki. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all fake news. And now you know the rest of the story, right,
and
John?
Now you know. And Brad, but folks don't get kabuki here. On Monday at 7 a.m., they'll get the real stuff, right?
Okay. Have a good weekend, John.